of the benefits. Being an empathetic leader really cultivates authentic relationship building, right? When you have an attitude as a leader where you're either combative, or some may call it cantankerous, or some may say that you're always in a position where you're not willing to grant grace, it slows up the process of relationship building. And we know that in the work that we do in the K-12 arena, relationships are incredibly important. Let me just add a caveat, and that is, being an empathetic leader and having a desire to cultivate relationships with individuals does not mean that you're not willing to hold folks accountable. So empathetic leadership oftentimes can be conflated with some other types of leadership, right? And so we want to talk a little bit today about what empathy or empathetic leadership is not, right? It's not this choice. There's this dichotomy, and it's a false one that people often raise between empathy and results. And one example that comes to mind for me is oftentimes those of us who are either teaching or leading or serve as related service providers are given this ultimatum that we have to get results. We have to get students to achieve. We have to get our schools to do well on state assessments and standardized assessments. And oftentimes, the kind of pressure that puts on us is it prevents us from giving individuals, let's say students, for example, who have significant academic deficits, significant socio-emotional deficits. It forces a number of people into this corner where they would say, you know what, if we give those students more opportunities, it means that we are not going to achieve the ultimate target of test results. I would push and encourage, because I've done this in many places. Some of you who are on this call right now, I've also seen you do this work, so I know this resonates with you, where it's okay to recognize the sociocultural experiences, to lead from a place of understanding the cultural strengths of individuals, give them empathy, right? Results will come eventually. When you think about not being empathetic and instead approaching this from a sympathetic standpoint, it's a no-no, right? Because sympathy essentially is that feeling of sorrow, that feeling of I see where you are and I'm sorry for you. What that does is it cheapens or minimizes the experience of individuals who can benefit from empathy, right? Case in point, let's think of a sympathy versus empathy. We know that empathy, when we think of empathy, we're talking about the emotions. And when we look at the work of a lot of emotion researchers, they remind us that empathy is really defined as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to just imagine and thinking about what it is that they're feeling and having a willingness to help them. Conversely, sympathy is more a shared feeling, usually one of sorrow. It's one of pity, one of compassion for another person, right? Where you're showing concern. Right now, given the COVID crisis, I know there's a lot of sympathy being ditched out towards a number of communities, particularly the Black and Brown community. This is not a time where sympathy is needed. I think we have to over-index on empathy. Yes.
So you said something that I think before working with you would have caused me to pause. And you said, if I am empathetic, the results would come eventually. And if I'm just being honest, hearing you say that, like before I had made this pivot, I would be like, what the heck do you mean eventually? I have 12 months to deliver on results. What does eventually look like? And I know school leaders have less than 12 months. The school year is only about 9 months. So could you just expound on what you mean when you say eventually?
Yeah. And so eventually is not a very specific timeline, right? So eventually actually is I would say the antithesis for I want you to get it done in 180 days, which is a typical school year. And this means that you have to exercise bold leadership if you're going to lead from a place of empathy. You're not saying to the powers that be, the policymakers, the executive leadership team in districts that you do not value academic achievement. You're not saying that you do not value the quantitative data points that we often sort of highlight and elevate in the K-12 arena. But if you're leading from your why, if you're leading from a place where you really value and want to make a contribution to the experiences of those students and the adults with whom you work, then eventually means that you are prioritizing the lived experience of the individuals that you're leading. And that is incredibly important. As I think about our current reality, the eventually really speaks, and this is certainly not my area of expertise. I know that there's some sort of medical leaders on the call right now, but during COVID-19, for us, the quantitative data points around the number of fatalities or when we are actually going to arrive at a vaccine is not as important as understanding people's lived experience as it is right now, right? Especially those in the K-12 arena. So eventually should not be a very specific timeline. Your focus should be on how can I make sure that I'm mitigating the lived experience of students who come before me, of parents who come before me, of the individuals in the faith-based community who work with schools. Yeah.
One of the things when we first started working together, you said directly to me was, you're slowing down so that you can speed up. You're doing prep work so that the outcomes are actually better, more sustainable. You're driving efficient decision making. You can skip past it if you want to. And it might look like you're going to go faster, but ultimately it ends up causing you more problems to skip past these steps.
It does. Let me just spend 30 seconds to build on that and use, oftentimes we talk about the race car or the NASCAR axiom, and that is slowing down in order to speed up, in order to get to your ultimate goal. If you look at race cars, NASCAR, every time they're going around a turn, when they're coming into the turn, they're coming in at 250 miles an hour. When they get to the turn, they usually decelerate to 200 miles an hour. The reason is they want to slow down to get around the turn in order for them to speed up. It requires patience and thoughtfulness. And we know it, right? If they do not slow down, what happens? We crash and burn. We've seen leaders, we've seen teachers, we've seen schools, we've seen the data point where when we decide not to slow down, why students decide to drop out in large numbers. We've seen the data point around when we do not lead with empathy and slow down, the school to prison pipeline continues to become pervasive. We've seen this disproportionate data outcomes. So thanks for the question and the push. It's important to slow down in order to speed up. There are three types of empathy, and the one that I think it's important for us to understand as school leaders probably is more around compassionate empathy. And we talk a lot about this in the research that we've done. And we know that cognitive empathy really speaks to simply knowing and understanding how a person is feeling, right? This is sometimes called, I think Daniel Goleman called it perspective taking. And it's where you want to understand what the other person is thinking. The second type of empathy, which is the emotional empathy, is when you feel physically along with someone as though, you know, their emotions were so contagious that you totally understand what it is they're going through. Whether you are a special education teacher and you're connecting with another special education teacher, and because you understand the work that they're doing, you can feel with them. If you are a school leader, a principal, or an assistant principal, oftentimes you can actually even finish the sentences of someone who is a ruler-like peer because you understand what it is they're dealing and feeling. The empathetic approach that we want to continue to encourage is the one around compassionate empathy, right? Just like it sounds, this really involves sort of directly feeling the emotions that another person is feeling. You know, you've probably heard the term empath, meaning that a person has the ability to fully take on the emotional and mental state of another. The standout sort of quality for me around compassionate empathy is that this type of empathy requires you not only to understand what someone is feeling, what it is they're enduring, but you're willing to take action to mitigate what it is they're struggling with. When I think of where we are right now with COVID-19, I know that about 98% of districts and schools around the country have embarked upon virtual learning. One of the things that is so troubling to me is the fact that we understand that from an equity standpoint, there is very limited access to either technology or other resources that students need in order to be successful. But yet I hear colleagues who are district leaders continuing to drop the proverbial hammer, if you may, on principals and assistant principals and teachers to increase student participation and increase student outcomes. It's laughable, and here's why it's laughable. We know that we have struggled to engage 75 or 80% of our students during the regular school year when they're coming to brick and mortar buildings, when we have them in front of us. And so for us to even conceive of or think that we can have this same or even much more of an impact around engagement while they're at home, while they're with parents who have multiple engagements, while they're being distracted by brothers and sisters in the other room, there's a serious lack of empathy. There's an erosion of empathy from school and district leaders that those of us who are on the call, or those of us who have a desire or a propensity to lead from an empathetic place is needed now more than ever. And so I want to really encourage the folks on the call, and encouraging some of my colleagues and like superintendents calls weekly to really be thoughtful about how are they engaging from an empathetic standpoint. The 7-second chances, the power of 7-second chances, and some of you in the call have heard this terminology before. And essentially, this is sort of the framework that we've created to lead with empathy. And it simply means, and we're going to probably expound on this in another session, having a willingness to give individuals not just one chance, not just 2 chances, but to give them 7-second chances. And essentially, the 7-second chance philosophy, and reach out via email, and I'll share more details about this in materials, is where you are willing to exhaust every opportunity to give someone, an adult or a student, not just 7 chances, but 7 times 2 chances to be successful. And our thinking based on research and our own lived experience is that we have not encountered anyone who you could give 14 chances to get something right, to be successful, and they fail at it. And so grounding the work in a 7-second chance approach is what we strongly encourage. Why empathetic leadership? What are some of the goals of empathetic leadership? So there are a few, and this is not an exhaustive list. One, leading from a place of empathy really encourages individuals to grow on the culturally responsive continuum. And we want to encourage you to join us for the next 2 sessions, and we're going to unpack the culturally responsive continuum. Essentially, leading from a place of empathy is why we can mitigate sort of the failure rates of a lot of individuals who are working with us and alongside us, as well as students. Leading from a place of empathy encourages you in the role that you're serving, whether you're leading adults or you're leading students, to have an orientation where you want to build accountability and you want to encourage grit so that people can persevere. It also influences performance. It improves capacity, and it also ensures that there's alignment between you and the individuals with whom you're working, as well as alignment between the individuals and the mission of the organization. And finally, when you lead from a place of empathy, it sort of really pushes your own thinking. It encourages you and it develops your mental, emotional, and intellectual muscles so that you're willing to become, as we shared earlier, much more tolerant. And it has the same effect as well on the recipient. They too can become much more tolerant. It develops their emotional muscles and their willingness to have sort of a paid-forward mentality.
So ultimately, who benefits from empathetic leadership? Oftentimes when I am approaching technical leaders, and when I say that, I mean someone who has gone from educating in the classroom to kind of leading, one of the first things or the first groups of people they think about when this topic comes up are the low performers. So the people for whom they are not cutting the mustard. And so how do I lead them in this way? And so just so that we can be clear and explicit, everyone benefits from empathetic leadership. And part of the reason why we ask you to reflect on the time when someone has given you some grace is because you also benefit from empathetic leadership. If we had your board chairs on the call, if we had your specific leaders on the call, we would be asking them to think about the power of 7-second chances with you as well. But in this specific time of the COVID crisis, it is even more important that you focus on being understanding and compassionate towards yourself, towards your family, towards your friends, and then everyone else, all of your other stakeholders. Often when I'm doing individual coaching, what I've learned is that the people who are hardest on others are the ones who are not giving themselves any grace. And so think about how you can practice a little empathy towards yourself as well, so that then you have enough to give to others. Some common issues and challenges that come up I know I brought up one of these already, and it is, how do we manage performance challenges if I'm leading from this place of 7-second chances? Our answer is very simple. It's called the Price Roberts model. We have created an entire toolkit for leaders that we give to you without you don't have to ask us, you don't have to give us your email address even. All you need to do is just email info@livelyparadox with the word empathy in the subject line, and we're happy to give you the entire toolkit for you to be able to use it with your folks. And the primary premise is simply this: if a person is self-aware and they know they have an issue or a challenge that they're trying to overcome, you can use this model to help them figure out what their way forward is going to be. And it clearly identifies what your role is, what their role is. It gives you specific steps that you can take to show up in a more empathetic and compassionate way. In the meantime, while you're practicing, why don't we just do it with the people who we think deserve it? We know you have people on your team that you would say, you know what, I would hire 20 more of that person if I could. How about practicing being just a little more empathetic and compassionate with them until you build your muscle to be able to do it with everyone on your team? But truly, we are being as generous as we possibly can, because that's one of our strategies for keeping our sanity during this time, is to be generous. Generosity for both Dr. Roberts and myself, or it fills our cup up. And so if you would just email info@livelyparadox.com with the word empathy in the subject line, we're happy to give you the entire toolkit for you to be able to use to help you with your empathetic and compassionate leadership approach.
Absolutely. And I want to also build in that, Dr. Price, just to add that again, being empathetic means that not only, especially during this time, that you are developing your own muscles, that you have this propensity to lead from, to walk in, to exercise empathy. But we asked you earlier to think of a time when you were granted grace. And again, for those of us who, regardless of your religious belief or whether or not there's no belief that you have, remember, grace is essentially, it's unmerited favor that people are willing to give to you. And so we want to also encourage you to do that for yourselves. What are you struggling with right now, as a K-12 leader, as a leader in the medical field, as a leader in the faith-based community? What is on top for you right now that even as you are engaging in this conversation, you're thinking, I am struggling with X, Y, and Z, and so it's difficult for me to even think about becoming empathetic towards someone else. It's okay to start with yourself. Give yourself that grace, grant yourself that mercy, if you may, before you dish it out to others. We have a little bit of time left, and I want to encourage, are there some questions or comments in the chat that we should react to?
Yeah, no questions just yet, but I'm hoping that some will come in, because the other thing that we're doing, the only use that we're using your email addresses for is to be able to, one, send you the culturally responsive toolkit, but we also want to send you a survey. We're trying to figure out what are the specific needs that leaders are having right now, so that we can pull our insights from our 40 years worth of combined experience on the operations front lines, helping people to be able to make it through crisis. So we're going to use that information that you provide us to help us know what else we need to provide for free, what other resources we need to give away. Dr. Roberts knows that we currently, it's about this kind of session live would cost $7,500. And so what we have said is, hey, listen, let's just give it all away. Because what's most important for us right now is that leaders are successful, that you're doing what's necessary so that you can get your operations back up and running. Because if you can do that, then we all win. So feel free to send us some questions in the chat. We did have some pretty, a wide range of situations that people felt that they got grace with. One, my father was dying of cancer, and the leadership was incredibly supportive, basically taking away some responsibilities that just could not be done, because they were the primary caregiver. And then another was allowing someone to just share their story, knowing that it would inspire and reach other people. You know,
Yes.
it's interesting sometimes how people want us to, there's even an adage, you know, leave your personal stuff at the door. Well, no one has ever been able to successfully do that, really. And so our ability to be able to show up and be real and authentic, especially in schools, it resonates with the people we work with.
Absolutely. Are there some others that we want to share? We have a couple of minutes.
Nope, no more questions. Nope, no more comments in chat. Oh, we got, when my wife was diagnosed with kidney failure, my principal gave me time off and didn't charge my time.
Wow.
And you know what's interesting? If you contrast that with when my dad died, my leader at the time, I had 5 weeks of vacation, had never missed a day, would be there 7 days a week, 3-shift operation. And I knew what the policy was around death, but he made it a point to make sure that I knew that I had to take vacation time because it was my stepdad, not my biological father.
Let me share this. Thank you for sharing that, Nicole, and all of you, thank you for sharing. I'll end with this. I have benefited from grace, empathy, and second chances throughout my life. A part of the genesis, in addition to the research that we've done, a part of the genesis of the 7 second chance philosophy, and some of you have heard this before, and I'm going to just abbreviate the story, is as a student in high school, I know you probably couldn't tell by looking at me now, because I'm now, some would consider saved or refined. But in high school, I had this propensity to be a pugilist. So essentially, I fought almost every single week and was suspended over and over again. But my high school principal, instead of expelling me, although she considered it, decided to give me a chance. And the time in which she gave me another chance to get it right was probably my 20th chance. And I've turned out to be not so bad after all. So every time I walk into a school, a student knocks on the door of a school that I'm leading or teaching in, it's the same approach I take. And I also take the same approach with adults with whom I work, right? Adults are not always going to get it right. But remember, there are 3 things that when you're leading with this from a place of empathy, I want you to consider. Make sure that people are feeling seen, heard, and supported, especially during this time. Anyone with whom you interact. And when you step outside today, even as you're social distancing, try it. Make sure that you are interacting with people in such a way where they feel seen, heard, and supported. I want to thank you all for being with us today. I think Nicole is going to have the last word, but thank you. And I'll make sure that we are sending you the invitation for next week's session, and we're likely to jump into another one of our 7 strategies.
Yeah, which will be the daily operation plan of excellence. So we're going to be super tactical next time. Again, just 30 minutes. We'll give you the tool so that you can have it for your resource and use. And please feel free to share it with anyone you think would benefit. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you.